In the dim light of an apartment where laughter once lived, a man sits alone on the floor. His knees are pulled to his chest, arms wrapped tight around them as if holding himself together is the only thing keeping him from unraveling completely. This is Jude, this fragile, broken man who carries within him decades of pain so heavy it feels like gravity itself bends toward him. The room smells faintly of coffee gone cold and rain seeping through cracks in the window pane. He doesn't cry, he never does anymore. Instead, he stares at the wall, tracing invisible patterns with his eyes, trying to disappear into the silence. The story begins here but stretches back further than words can hold, the kind of past that lingers like smoke long after the fire has been extinguished. Jude was born without roots, tossed into life's cruelest currents before he could even understand what breathing meant. There were hands that hurt him, voices that broke him, and nights so dark they swallowed entire pieces of who he might have been. By the time he found Willem, Malcolm, and JB, his chosen family, his accidental saviors, he had already learned how to survive by making himself small, by becoming someone no one could see or touch. But survival isn't living, and though he tried to hide behind walls built too high for anyone to climb, these three men refused to let him stay hidden. Willem was the first to see beyond the armor Jude wore. Quietly persistent, he would sit beside Jude during their college years, sketching actors' faces while Jude worked equations in his head. They didn't speak much then, but there was something in Willem's gaze, a softness, a steadiness, that made Jude feel, for the first time, like maybe being seen wasn't always dangerous. Years later, when they shared an apartment in New York City, Willem would cook meals Jude barely ate, coaxing him out of bed on mornings when the weight of everything felt unbearable. "You're not alone," Willem would say, over and over, until the words began to take shape inside Jude's mind, fragile and uncertain but real nonetheless. Malcolm and JB brought other kinds of light. Malcolm, steady and kind, designed spaces where people could belong, and somehow he included Jude in those blueprints without ever saying a word about it. JB painted portraits of all of them, loud and colorful, capturing moments Jude wished he could forget but couldn't bring himself to erase. Their friendship wasn't perfect. It was messy, complicated, full of arguments and misunderstandings, but it was alive. It pulsed with something Jude hadn't known existed: love that didn't demand perfection, loyalty that didn't falter even when he pushed them away. And yet, despite their efforts, Jude remained haunted. Every scar on his body told a story he couldn't escape, every memory a ghost that followed him wherever he went. Pain became his constant companion, shaping his days and stealing his nights. He hated himself, not just for what had been done to him, but for the way he carried it, for the way it spilled into the lives of those who loved him. How could they want him, broken as he was? How could they stay when they knew the truth? One night, lying awake in the darkness, Jude thought about cutting again. Not because he wanted to die, but because the act of slicing into his skin felt like control, like proof that he still existed. The blade rested on the bedside table, glinting under the moonlight streaming through the blinds. He reached for it, his fingers trembling, but then he stopped. In the quiet, he heard Willem's voice echoing in his mind, "I'm here. I'll always be here." For a moment, the urge faded, replaced by something softer, something almost like hope. But hope, for Jude, was fleeting. It came in bursts, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, only to vanish again just as quickly. There were times when he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Like the day Willem moved into his own bedroom, leaving Jude's spare room untouched, a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere. Or the evenings when all four of them gathered around the table, talking about nothing and everything, laughter filling the air like music. These moments weren't enough to heal him. They couldn't undo the damage, but they were enough to keep him tethered to the world, to remind him that beauty still existed, even if it felt far away. Still, the past was always waiting. It lurked in shadows, in crowded subway cars, in the sound of footsteps behind him on empty streets. Sometimes it came rushing back without warning, dragging him under like a riptide. On those days, he locked himself away, unable to face the world or the people in it. His friends would knock on his door, calling his name softly, pleading with him to open up. And sometimes, After hours or days, he would. Other times, he wouldn't. Either way, they stayed. They waited. They reminded him, in their own quiet ways, that surviving wasn't the same as giving up. There was a particular afternoon when Willem took Jude to Central Park. Autumn had settled over the city, painting the trees in hues of gold and crimson. Jude walked slowly, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his shoulders hunched against the chill. Willem talked animatedly about some new role he'd auditioned for, gesturing wildly with his hands, his excitement contagious. Jude listened, nodding occasionally, letting the sound of Willem's voice wash over him. When they reached the reservoir, Willem stopped and turned to Jude, his expression serious for the first time that day. "Do you know why I brought you here?" he asked. Jude shook his head. "Because I wanted you to see this," Willem said, sweeping his arm across the horizon. "This place is alive, Jude. It changes every season, every day. And so do you. You're not stuck. You're not frozen. Even if it feels like it, you're moving forward." Jude looked at him, tears welling in his eyes. He wanted to believe Willem, desperately. But believing required trust, and trust was something he had lost long ago. Still, he nodded because he knew Willem needed him too. Because, in that moment, surrounded by falling leaves and the distant hum of the city, he wanted to try. The seasons passed, each one leaving its mark on Jude like rings in a tree trunk, some thicker, some thinner, but all part of the same unbroken core. Winter came with its biting cold and shorter days, wrapping the city in layers of gray. Spring followed, hesitant at first, then bursting forth with colors so vivid they almost hurt to look at. Through it all, Jude kept walking, kept breathing, kept trying. Not because he believed things would get easier, he didn't, but because he owed it to Willem, to Malcolm, to JB, to the fragments of himself that still clung stubbornly to life. But there were moments when even their love wasn't enough. Moments when the weight of everything became too heavy to carry, when the past reached out with icy fingers and pulled him back into its depths. One such moment came late one evening, after a dinner shared with his friends. They had laughed, teased each other, talked about plans for the future. For a few hours, Jude had let himself believe in the illusion of normalcy, in the possibility of happiness. But as soon as he stepped into his apartment and closed the door behind him, the walls seemed to close in, suffocating him with memories he couldn't outrun. He called Willem that night, his voice trembling as he whispered, "I can't do this anymore." Willem didn't ask questions, he simply said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes, and hung up. When he arrived, breathless from running up the stairs, he found Jude sitting on the floor, his head buried in his hands. Without a word, Willem sat down beside him, pulling Jude into his arms. Jude resisted at first, stiff and unyielding, but then he crumbled, clinging to Willem like a drowning man clutching at driftwood. "I'm sorry," Jude choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry." "You don't have to apologize," Willem murmured, his voice steady despite the ache in his chest. "You're allowed to feel this way. You're allowed to fall apart. We're here." It wasn't a cure, not by any stretch of the imagination. But it was something, a lifeline thrown into the abyss, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, he wasn't alone. Time moved forward, relentless and unforgiving. Years slipped through their fingers like sand, bringing changes both subtle and profound. Malcolm built homes, literal and metaphorical, creating spaces where people could find shelter from the storms of life. JB painted portraits that captured the raw beauty of imperfection, his work celebrated in galleries around the world. Willem's career soared, his name becoming synonymous with brilliance and authenticity. And Jude? Jude endured. He fought battles no one else could see, waged wars against enemies only he knew. Some days he won. Other days he barely survived. But survive he did, carrying the weight of his scars like a penance he hadn't asked for but couldn't escape. There were small victories along the way, tiny cracks in the armor he had worn for so long. Like the day he agreed to see a therapist, not because he thought it would help, but because Willem begged him to try. Or the time he let Malcolm design a garden for him, planting flowers that bloomed in defiance of the concrete jungle surrounding them. These moments weren't grand or transformative, but they mattered. They added up, piece by fragile piece, until Jude began to realize that maybe, just maybe, he was more than the sum of his pain. Still, the ghosts of his past lingered, refusing to release their grip entirely. There were nights when sleep eluded him, haunted by dreams that felt more real than waking life. Days when the mere act of existing felt like a betrayal of everything he had lost. Yet, amidst the wreckage, there were glimmers of light, soft, fleeting, but undeniable. A smile from Willem that made the world seem less bleak. A note from Malcolm reminding him that he was loved. A painting by JB that captured a version of Jude he barely recognized but desperately wanted to believe in. And then, one spring morning, Jude woke up to find the sun streaming through his window, warming his face in a way that felt almost tender. He lay there for a while, listening to the sounds of the city stirring to life outside. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to run, to hide, to disappear. He got out of bed, walked to the kitchen, and made coffee. It was a simple act, ordinary even, but it carried a significance that brought tears to his eyes. He was still standing, still breathing, still fighting. Later that day, he met Willem in the park. They sat on a bench overlooking the reservoir, watching as runners and cyclists moved along the path below. The air smelled of fresh grass and blooming flowers, and for once, Jude didn't feel the urge to flinch away from the beauty of it all. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" Jude asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Willem smiled, his gaze warm and unwavering. "Every word." Jude nodded, looking out at the water shimmering under the sunlight. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "For staying. For believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Willem reached over and took Jude's hand, squeezing it gently. "Always," he replied. "Always." It wasn't an ending, not really. Life doesn't work that way, not for someone like Jude. His journey wasn't marked by redemption or resolution, but by endurance. By the quiet courage it took to keep going, day after day, year after year. He carried his scars like old maps, guiding him through a landscape forever altered by pain. But he also carried the love of his friends, the fragile hope they had given him, the fleeting moments of joy that reminded him why he kept fighting. In the end, it wasn't about fixing what had been broken. It was about learning how to live with the cracks, how to let light seep through the fractures and illuminate the parts of himself he had tried so hard to bury. It was about finding meaning in the struggle, grace in the survival. About enduring. And endure he did. Feel like you're meant for more, but don't know how to get there? You're not alone. Every success story starts with doubt and a spark. The Self-Made Millionaire, Zero to Wealth isn't just a book. It's your roadmap to purpose, confidence, and success, built on real lessons from real millionaires. One reader said, "It didn't feel like a book. It felt like my future talking to me." Inside, you'll find the exact mindset and principles used by the world's most successful people. No fluff, just real, life-changing wisdom. Ready to take the first step? Get it 100% free. Just subscribe and comment "book" below.